And with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists for our Solar 101 presentation. We have Yesenia Rivera. She is the VP of Energy Equity and Inclusion with Solar United Neighbors, and Corey Ramsden, who is the VP of the Go Solar programs at Solar United Neighbors. So Yesenia and Corey, take it away.
Thank you, Ellie. So you mentioned my name is Yesenia Rivera, and I am the Vice President of Energy Equity and Inclusion at Solar United Neighbors, and I'm also a recovering housing counselor. Used to be a housing counselor before I started working in solar, so I know a little bit about what you all are going through. Can we go on to the next slide? Next slide. So Solar United Neighbors is a 501c3. We're a nonprofit and we're vendor neutral. So even though we work with a lot of solar installers across the country, we are neutral in terms of we recommend different installers to our customers or our co-op members. We never tell them to go with one or the other. It's their choice. Next slide. So our mission is to help people go solar, join together, and fight for their energy rights. Next slide. Since we started, we've worked with almost 10,000 families, helped them go solar, and we've helped them save, I think it's over 1 million tons of CO2 and install over 83 megawatts of solar. Next slide. And like I said, we started back in 2007. At that time, Walter, the son of our executive director and founder, Anya Schoolman, and his friend Diego came back from watching An Inconvenient Truth and said, "Mom, we have to go solar." When Anya started looking into it, she saw it. There wasn't a lot of information about going solar in DC. I think there were only 2 companies at the time that worked in DC, and they kept getting different information about what it meant to go solar in the district, the cost, the equipment, all that. So they decided to get the neighborhood together. It was Mount Pleasant here in Washington, DC, and do it as a neighborhood. It took them 2 years to go solar. At the end of the time, 45 of the homes actually ended up going solar at the end of the 2 years. And once people heard what Anya had done in DC, they started asking her to help them go solar. And now we are a national program. We have staff in 12 different states across the country, but we work at a national level. And like I said, we've worked in all 50 states, including also Puerto Rico and DC. We've had 440 plus solar programs that we've run across the country, and over about 10,000 homes that we've helped gone solar with our group purchase agreements. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, our theory of change is go solar, join together, and fight for your energy rights. We help people come together as a neighborhood, as a community, learn more about going solar, do it in bulk purchase campaign to help reduce the cost of going solar. And Corey's going to explain a little bit of that later on. Share resources, tours, and just learn about it as a group. And most importantly, activate folks to fight for their energy rights, whether it is fighting for net metering, fighting homeowners associations that want to curtail how people go solar, and just representing solar homeowners in general. Next slide. Now, before I get started with the presentation, I want to take a moment to address the inequities in our current energy system. Communities of color, and particularly Black community, bear an unfair share of what's happening with our energy system, in particular the cost of energy production, and receive fewer benefits. Families of color are disproportionately harmed by higher utility bills and shutoffs. On top of that, and I'm sure preaching to the choir here, housing discrimination is a barrier to home ownership, solar home ownership. When Sun started, it was a group of diverse, economically and racially diverse neighbors in Mount Pleasant. They focus on solar because it helped people pay their bills. It helped lower the cost of their electric bills. It also helped them stay in their homes at a time when DC was going through gentrification very quickly, in a time when the country as a whole was in the middle of a financial crisis. Rooftop solar lets communities invest locally, creates good jobs, and brings control of the energy system to the people. We're working towards a new energy system that serves for everyone, that works for everyone, and folks can participate, and it's one that is fair and equitable. Next slide. So I know you've probably been hearing a lot about Solar for All, about all the federal funding that has come into existence since the IRA was signed. The Inflation Reduction Act was signed a few years ago. This is a groundbreaking national program with billions of federal dollars attached to it. It's meant to help income qualified families benefit from solar energy. The goals are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well as deliver benefits to income qualified households in disadvantaged communities. It is run by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and $7 billion have been distributed among 60 grantees. These grantees are spread throughout the entire United States, DC, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, as well as tribal lands. And according to the EPA, 90% of the grantees will fund residential solar, rooftop solar, plus 88% of these grantees will also be working on community solar projects that are meant to serve income qualified and disadvantaged households. The beauty about community solar projects is that they don't have to own their home in order to access clean energy. So these grantees each design their own programs and are tailored to their communities in particular. And as I mentioned earlier, this funding was made possible by the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide. So why is solar for all so important? Said this is a one-time historical investment by the federal government meant to help income qualified households. The idea is to lower their energy bills, eliminate the barriers to solar energy, and also to change the market, to encourage private investment in the market so that after these 5 years of the program are over, we can then transition to a market that can help people go solar without the federal incentives. Next slide. So today we're going to be covering certain things, solar battery technology, solar economics, as well as incentives, and how can sun help. And I will hand it over to my colleague, Corey, to walk you through the rest of the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for the invitation to be here. We really appreciate it. And thanks for coming and spending some of your time this afternoon. Thanks, Jasenia, for that intro there. And you can see my responsibility this afternoon is to give you some grounding around solar technology, not only the technology part of it, but also economics, incentives, and then some ways that Solar United Neighbors as an organization can help you get through some of these questions in your work. Next slide. Next slide, please. So we're going to start off with just a little bit of foundational grounding on the, the technology. Just to be clear, we're talking about photovoltaic solar. So there's solar hot water, concentrating solar, which are those really large like mirror dishes you may have seen pictures of online. But these are really about photovoltaics, where we are using PV cells to convert sunlight into electricity. Next slide. It's a pretty simple technology when it comes down to it. We're talking about a frame, usually a rigid frame with some glass and an aluminum border around it with some protection to weatherize it. And then silicon-based cells, almost always the installations that you'll have on rooftops are going to be silicon-based equipment, where there's some wiring running in between those cells. When the light strikes them, that excites some electrons in those cells, and then they flow through wiring out to the rest of the system. And we'll talk about how that connects. But these panels are really meant to be outside in harsh conditions for 20 to 25 years, if not longer. Next slide. One thing that's really important, especially for if you're installing solar on your house, is really understanding how it connects to your roof. There are a lot of different ways that the solar industry has gotten very good at doing to accommodate different roof types. Racking, when you hear someone talk about racking, they're talking about the structure that is installed typically below the panels to support them, and connect those panels to the roof or to themselves if it's on the ground, to be able to make sure that it is firmly in place on that roof and can withstand all of the local conditions. In up north, that means snow load. In the south and in places where you've got a lot of storms, that means high wind loads. Those are all things that the local permitting office is going to inspect when the system is designed. But racking is really where that system connects to the roof. It's done in a way that makes sure that that roof will not leak when it's done properly. And there's a lot of different equipment they can use to do that. You'll see on this particular slide, one of the ways that they've done it historically is by using a similar technology that you would see for roofing trades, which is a flashing that goes up underneath the asphalt shingle to make sure that water slides off and does not get into the roof itself. So that's one method. Next slide. Solar also works on flat roofs. For folks that are in urban environments, you will sometimes hear people question whether solar can work on a flat roof. It absolutely can. This picture is actually of my roof. I've been a solar owner since 2012. I live in Washington, D.C., and helped design and install this system when I used to work for a solar company way back when. And the system is still up and running. It's been running for close to 15 years now, lowering my electricity bill by about 50% every year. This system was installed on a flat roof with a standing seam metal roof, but there's lots of different roof types that the installations can accommodate. So most important thing to take away here is that with a few exceptions for certain types of roof, old slate, old clay tile, things like that, most of the time the solar industry is going to have a means to connect solar to the building roof structure. Next slide. You also see solar on the ground. If you have properties that are someplace where those zoning laws will let you install solar on the ground, this is a great alternative. You can point the system directly south, which is going to generate the most electricity in northern climates, northern hemisphere. And you're able to obviously not install it on a rooftop, which some people appreciate. So if you do have clients that do have space at all in a yard, in some cases, if they're in more suburban or rural areas, they may be able to do a ground mount as well. Next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about the other components here. One of the really important ones is the inverter or inverters, depending on the system you have. You can think of the inverters as really the brains of the system. This is the part of the system that's going to convert the electricity that's coming off of the panels. And when the sun strikes the solar panels and generates electricity, they're generating what's called direct current. That direct current then needs to be converted or inverted into alternating current, which is the type of electricity form that houses use. So the inverter is doing that either in a couple different forms. One, and these are things just to be aware of as consumers. When you're talking to an installer, they might be using this vocabulary or talking about this equipment. So we want to make sure people understand some of the the ins and outs of it. A string inverter is going to be where there's a single unit that controls the whole system. And there are some benefits to that. Usually it can be done a little more cheaply, but there are also some limitations in terms of what it can do when part of the system is shaded, for example. And then on the right-hand side, you have microinverters, and these are when there is equipment that's actually connected to each panel. So they're actually kind of like mini little inverters that operate in coordination with every single panel that does that conversion of electricity. These often get used in modern industry, they get used more and more, but they are particularly effective at making sure a solar array produces as much as it can when sometimes that array might be shaded. So maybe there's a shadow from a chimney or from a tree nearby. Microinverters are one way to maximize the energy production. And then you have some systems like the one in the middle that are kind of a combination where some of the technology is underneath the panel and some of it's down on the ground, and they coordinate and work together. Next slide. Once that system electricity is converted, it's going to flow into your main electric panel. That main electric panel is usually going to be okay. For older houses, you might need to upgrade it depending on how large the panel is. There's some rules in the National Electric Code that require a panel to be a certain size in terms of where the solar connects in that main breaker box. The installer will be able to analyze and decide all of this, usually for homes that have been built after like the 70s. you're probably going to have a panel that supports without an upgrade, but you do potentially have for older homes would need to do an upgrade. The good news is that upgrade can actually be done oftentimes by the installer. So sometimes you save a little money by having the installer do the panel upgrade as well as the solar at the same time. And because that panel upgrade is part of the requirements to install solar, the cost of it actually is eligible for the federal tax credit, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. It's a pretty simple connection. Usually it's just a breaker at the bottom of the solar panel that you can turn on and off, or if you needed to, but it just usually will stay on. Next slide. We're going to have a little bit on terminology here because we do want to make sure that people understand the difference between the two terms that you'll hear used when talking about solar. Kilowatts is really the rating of the system to be able to produce energy. So it's like the capacity rating. How much energy it produces depends on local conditions. And energy is expressed in kilowatt hours. That's what's on your utility bill. That's what people are paying for with their electricity, and that is how much over time. So kilowatt hours is power over a time period. Kilowatt hours is also, like, as I said, what you'll see on your utility bill that determines what you're going to pay to the electric company in addition to any of the fixed charges that might be on your bill. So solar panels are rated in watts. Systems are rated in kilowatts usually. And then kilowatt hours is the production that will come from that system based on your local conditions. And you can see this just an example of like a system size. Most home sizes, average sizes, like you see on the slide, about 6 to 7 kilowatts. They can be as small as 2 or 3. That's just a handful of panels, all the way up to even 20 to 30 kilowatts for really large homes. Next slide. So we're going to put all this together now. You've got your panels on the roof. Those panels generate electricity, DC electricity, that flows into your inverter or inverters if you're using microinverters. It gets converted to alternating current, and then it flows to your electric panel. Once it gets to your electric panel, if you're using electricity in the home at that moment, you're going to use that solar electricity right on the spot. Any of the extra electricity, if you are making more than you need at that moment, is going to flow out through your meter and out into the grid and supply electricity loads for your neighbors or somebody else further down in the electric system. So those are all the primary components. Next slide. So let's put this together in terms of examples for how you get value from solar. And we'll talk about the economics a little bit later, but one of the main drivers of the economics of solar is that you are reducing how much electricity you need from the utility. You're going to do that primarily by producing electricity that you'll use in the home during the day when you're making electricity and you're using electricity. But some of those electrons, like I mentioned in the previous slide, those are going to flow out through your meter and they're going to go out to the grid. How you get credited for that, in other words, how much your utility pays you, matters a lot for the economics. Most places still in the United States have a policy called net metering, which means that when you send energy out to the grid, if you're not using it right on the spot, you're going to get paid the same amount that you would have bought it from the utility company. We call that one-to-one crediting or one-to-one net metering. There are places in the country, and that's becoming more common, where the amount of energy cost that you get paid, the amount that you get paid to selling your energy out to the grid is less than what you buy it at. And those crediting rates, which we're going to talk about in a couple slides, change the value of solar for you, because in that situation, you want to use as much of your solar on site and send less of it because you're getting less value for it when you send it out to the grid. So let's just give you an example just to kind of bring it all together. Excuse me. Let's say on the weekend, you're home, your panels are up and it's sunny, you're generating a lot of electricity, you're watching the game, you've got all the lights on, you're maybe cooking something. That electricity is flowing down into your panel and you're using it right there. So probably most of it's not even going to go through your meter. You're just going to offset your electricity demand from the utility. I mean, in other words, you're not going to have to buy that electricity from the utility because you just made it. Monday rolls around, you're not at home, the lights are maybe not on, you're using less electricity in your house, but you're still generating a lot of electricity. That electricity is going to go, you're going to use whatever you need, but you're using less. So that is going to flow out to the electricity grid, and you're going to get credited for it. So over and over again, that using up electricity, storing it up, getting credits for it and consuming it, that is what happens over and over again for your billing. And if you have credits for that electricity, so those credits you sent out that you got credit for on Monday when you weren't home, when you come back Monday night, in this example, and you turn on the lights and start cooking, you're going to use that credit value from the utility before you have to buy more electricity. So that bank of credits is what is also driving the value of the system for you. Next slide. I just kind of alluded to this in my previous example, but when you produce electricity, which is during the day, and when you use electricity, matters when you're not getting full credit for that electricity. So if it's not a net metering state, most of them still are, the value of what you send out is going to be less during the day. If you're using your electricity at night, you're going to have to pay more than what you got credited to send it out during the daytime. So that's one of the things that we actually work a lot on in policy at Solar United Neighbors, is we want to make sure that homeowners get fair credit for the electricity they send to the grid. Next slide. Some examples just to kind of are key categories to keep in your head when we're talking about the value of electricity is one, it matters where you live because not all the rules are the same. We can help you figure that out if you're not sure for your area. The installer is going to be able to tell you. Our help desk can tell you as well. And we'll talk about the help desk at the end of the presentation. It can vary by state, but even by utility. And there's sort of three ways you can think about it. That one-to-one credit that I mentioned, that's still majority of the places in the US. You get the same value when you send it out that you would if you purchased it. So we call that one-to-one. Fixed is if anytime you send a credit out, it always has the same value. It's usually less than what you would have paid for it, but it's always 10 cents or whatever that policy says. And then varying, it might switch based on the time of day or the time of year. So in the summertime, you might get charged, or you might get paid more to send electricity to the grid than you would in the winter, or maybe more in the evening versus in the middle of the day. Next slide. So we talked a lot about the economics and how the pieces fit together, but how do you know if your house is a good, or a property is a good fit for solar? Generally speaking, in the northern hemisphere, anything that faces due south is going to generate the most electricity. So roofs that face south. Something that faces east or west or anywhere in between is still going to be okay. And for flat roofs, if it's facing a little bit north, that's probably okay too, depending on the location. And you want as little shading as possible. So you houses that are covered by a lot of trees, or whether the roof is shaded most of the time, that's generally not going to be a good fit because you're not going to be able to generate enough electricity to make the economics work. And then you want at least about 200 square feet roughly on the roof to use for a system. And that's mostly because systems that are too small, the installers are generally not going to want to install them because there's just too much transaction cost and not enough value for them to do that. So that depends on the installer. Next slide. So if you don't have a good roof for solar, there are some places in the country that have other ways to access solar called community solar, where you get essentially virtual credits on your bill. So the solar is not on your property, it's someplace else where you live, might be on a roof, might be on a big warehouse, for example. It might be in a field, and you can subscribe to or become a customer of that array and get those credits virtually put onto your utility bill. And this is called community solar. Next slide. It's not available everywhere. You can see a map here that says it shows a lot of places where it is. That little list on the left of places where it has the most solar, those are programs that are well established. New York, for example, if I remember right, Ellie from NHRC is a customer and lives in New York State. So that's an example. I used to be a customer in Washington, D.C., where I live, before the array got filled up. And there are other places throughout the country that have these programs. When they do, that's another way that somebody can access solar and not have it on their property. So this is an example of a policy that we feel really strongly about. We want to see adopted all over the country. We're actually working to pass community solar laws in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, and other parts of the country. Next slide. Okay, so we've talked about rooftop solar. We've talked about community solar. If you don't have it, space and can't put it on your roof, what happens when the power goes out? This is a common question that we get. People are often confused because they think that solar by itself will work when the power goes out. But the reality is that their systems are designed to not send electricity to the grid when the power is out for safety reasons. The utility companies, for good reason, don't want a solar array sending power to the grid when there are lines people out there trying to fix it. So in order for you to keep your electricity on when the utility power goes out, you typically would need batteries. Those systems isolate themselves from the grid when the power goes out, and then you run some or all of your house using the batteries, and then the solar panels charge those batteries. Next slide. You get some value from this. In most places where you don't need them to be able to like shift when you use electricity, you're really talking about resiliency. So if you are someplace where the power goes out frequently, or you have situations like maybe critical medical equipment or other loads in your house, backup power can be a really good way to protect yourself. Battery backup is more expensive than, say, a gas generator up front, but works better over time. It can be charged from solar rather than relying on sources of gasoline or natural gas, depending on how you're powering it. And it's also better in terms of the cleanliness of the air and just a general experience. So the prices for storage are starting or have been coming down for a while, and we see more and more people adopting them. We actually have run some programs as well where we've helped people in disadvantaged communities and in frontline communities that are impacted by power outages actually get solar in their areas to be able to support backup situations that they might need. In Houston, for example, we just did a pilot last year with this very idea. Next slide. Coming back to the terminology again, you can think of the kilowatt hours is something that you store. That's what goes in your battery. And then the power is how much of it you can push out at once. So when you're talking about batteries, that concept of like, I have so many kilowatt hours that I'm holding onto in my battery that I can power my house with. And then how much of it can I send out quickly? Because you might need to run lights that takes less electricity than, say, running an air conditioner. Next slide. So just to kind of give you a visual for that, an air conditioner is going to be like a quick, powerful rush of energy. That's a bigger battery and maybe a more powerful battery than one that is just, running lights or maybe charging your cell phone with just little bits of energy that you need. So that changes what batteries you might need as well as the cost. Next slide. Batteries are really, I love talking about battery storage. There's a lot of information there. We're not going to go over it today. We just wanted to give you kind of a teaser of what it is and why it's important. We do have a really great storage guide, as you see here. The links will probably be in the chat if they're not already. And we highly recommend taking a look at it if you're interested in battery storage and reaching out to our help desk. We're happy to connect you with additional resources and answer questions on that. Next slide. Okay, so we've learned about the basic technologies. Now I've gone through and I've signed a contract and I'm ready to go. What's involved with that? Going solar, the timelines for going solar can depend quite a bit on your local rules and where you are. So we've seen in some places it might take 2 months from the time you sign a contract until you have a working system. And in other places, it might be 6 months. These are the general pieces of that installation. Someone's going to need to come and verify your house is, your electric panel is a certain size and type, the measurements on the roof, that kind of thing. The installer is going to design your system, making sure that you're getting what you've asked for in terms of all the equipment and the setup. They're going to have to go to the local jurisdiction and ask for permission to connect it, as well as to the utility company. We call that interconnection. So the installer needs to say, hey, can I put this new electricity generator, solar panels, in this area? And then the utility will give you approval to go ahead and start the process. Then they're going to spend a whole bunch of money on equipment. The installation itself, when they come to your house, pretty quick. It's only like a day or two often. The solar industry has gotten really good. Companies that are well run can do that part of the process very, very efficiently. Then when they're done, They got to get an inspection from the local jurisdiction, and then the utility has to give final approval, which is that sort of second step of that interconnection process. And then last, but certainly not least, and an area we often find installers maybe sometimes don't communicate as well as they should, is commissioning. And that is, here's your system, here's how it works, here's how to get into your monitoring so you can see how your system's functioning. Excuse me. And here's any questions that you might want to ask about the system. We call that commissioning. It's sort of the final handover and training for a homeowner. Next slide. This one is a little bit of a catch-all, but it's really important because we get these questions all the time when we're interacting with the general public and homeowners about solar. First off, warranties. Your solar installer is going to come and do this work, and they're going to have a workmanship warranty of some length that says, these are the things that we're responsible for. That's assembling the parts of the system together and putting it online, attaching it to your roof. Roof penetrations and leaks are often going to be covered under this that workmanship warranty. However, you have other warranties that come with the system. You have product warranties for the panels and for the inverters, and those are going to be anywhere from 10 to 20 years. Pardon me just for a second. Excuse me. And then you will also have what they call a production warranty for the panels, which is really a promise from the manufacturer that it's going to continue to produce energy at a very predictable rate. Those warranties will stay in effect even if your installer goes out of business. So you still have some warranties as long as the manufacturers are in business that can remain, which is important for people to know. Homeowners insurance. This is a really important topic for folks because the picture here is changing. Historically, homeowners insurance doesn't really get impacted by solar. Sometimes you'll get a discount for companies that have like a climate commitment. Usually the impact is neutral. Every once in a while, you'll see the price go up a little bit, but it's really important for homeowners to call their insurance company before they install solar to know what the impact is going to be for them. In some places, like Florida in particular, in other spots, we are seeing that it is harder to get insurance for solar or have homeowners insurance companies balk at solar. Not so much because of the solar, but because they're generally having a problem insuring homes. But if you're in a place, particularly in Florida, but other places as well, and you're getting that answer, definitely contact us. Some companies are more open to supporting solar in those areas than others. But generally speaking, in most of the country, your homeowner's insurance should be able to cover it just the way it would under any other improvement to your home. For maintenance, these systems are pretty low maintenance. They don't typically require much to keep them operable, but we do recommend they're going to be on your roof or on your property for 15, 20, even 25 years. And it's an important investment to lower the cost of your electricity. So we do recommend that you at least have someone inspect it every couple years. We say somewhere between every 3 to 5 years. You probably want a qualified inspector to come and just make sure things look okay and that they're still in good working order. Things like squirrel damage, for example. Squirrels, for whatever reason, love solar wires. If you have squirrels near your house, you definitely think about getting a critter guard or something to keep them away from the wiring because they will have a snack and can sometimes create damage there. So that's one reason why you might want to get a regular inspection. But there aren't any moving parts. There's nothing to maintain. You just kind of want to make sure things haven't degraded because of any of the conditions around the property. As I mentioned a minute ago, systems are in good working order can last 20 to 25, even 30 years. There are systems out there that were deployed in the 70s and 80s that are still functioning. So it is a long-term investment to reduce your cost of electricity for a property. So that's they're built to last. HOAs, which is a homeowner association, most of them are supportive or at least neutral to solar, but we have seen in some places where a homeowners association will be resistant. In some states, there are laws that say that they can't deny solar on a property. Many of them might do that anyways if they're resistant. So it's important to know what that situation is for you and to ask ahead of time what the process is from your HOA to get solar approved for you. Historic districts, Those rules vary quite a bit. In many cases, it's an extra step or review, but it's still okay. Those are all always available. The historic districts are usually able to work with solar installations, but there are sometimes restrictions about where the solar can be installed. So for example, I live on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. My panels can't be seen from the street. I have a flat house, a flat roof rather, and they're not visible, but I couldn't have a system where somebody could see it from across the street because I'm in a historic district. Next slide. Moving on to economics. We're going to talk a lot about how the value comes into play here. Next slide for solar. Just to kind of set it out of the way first, I think a lot of folks know this now, but the cost of solar has dropped tremendously since it came out as a technology back in the 70s. There are a lot of things that notions that folks have had for a long time about it being really only for high income households, but that's no longer true. The price points are much more reasonable for people to be able to afford, especially with good loan products. Solar for all also is another way that we see rooftop solar being made more and more available. The underpinning for this is the federal tax credit, which is 30%, and that is a non-refundable credit that you can take on your taxes. So you do have to have tax liability to use it, but you can take it over multiple years if you can't use it all in 1 year. Next slide. A lot of the cost of solar really, because the equipment costs have come down so much over the last 2 decades, a lot of the cost now is really about finding customers. And that's where some of our buying groups come in, because solar installers really spend a lot of money looking for customers to be able to market to them. So we refer to that as soft costs. There's other things that go into soft costs, like permitting and interconnection. That soft cost is really part of why buying groups like the ones we organize help, is because we are aggregating that demand. We're getting a lot of people who want to go solar, and the installers that service those groups are saving money because they don't have to go and find each individual customer. Next slide. As I mentioned a minute ago, the federal tax credit is really the underpinning of rooftop solar and all solar in the United States. And it was set in the Inflation Reduction Act to be at that 30% level all the way until 2032. We have a new administration, we have a new Congress. It's possible that this could change, but from what we're seeing so far, the solar is popular in red and blue states and all over the country. So there's a pretty decent chance that this credit will stay in place. The sunsetting, or how quickly it ramps down, might change, but this is one of those credits that we see is probably more likely to be safe. We'll have to find out, wait and see. But right now, this 30% tax credit is one of the strongest pieces of incentive for going solar. So if you know somebody who's going solar in 2025, there shouldn't be any issue there as long as the system is completed, because any changes somebody might make to this, Congress might make, would not take effect until the new tax year. And we're very hopeful that it will stay in place. Next slide. There are other incentives that are out there, and these can vary quite a bit by state. Grants and rebates, which we talked about briefly with Solar for All, and we'll talk about again. Property tax exemptions are pretty common, where the solar is essentially, the state law says that solar doesn't add to the property tax bill, and as well as property tax credits, where you might actually be getting a credit back. These are less common, but they are available in some states. Subsidized loans and leases, we will see a lot of that with Solar for All in terms of how that money gets deployed. Some of it will be in the form of grants and rebates to pay solar down or even to cover the full cost, but a lot of it will be in the form of heavily subsidized financing products for people to take advantage of. And some of those already exist at the state level. Some states have what are called green banks that are specifically available to create and offer loan products that are competitive, specifically for solar and for other energy improvement projects and energy efficiency. Income qualified incentives we've been talking about with Solar for All, and then we'll come back to that as well. And then the last one, I'm going to spend a couple slides talking about. These are solar renewable energy credits, or SRECs. Next slide. You can think of SRECs as the green value of the electricity. This is the not the electric value that you get on your utility bill. So this is not the reduction of your kilowatt hours that you're using. This is that that sort of intangible green value. In some places, those credits have a value because of legislation that's in place. So those are states that have what they call renewable portfolio standards, where the state has said that the utilities need to have a certain percentage of their electricity supply come from renewable sources. Oftentimes, there is a companion to that that essentially requires utilities to buy renewable energy credits to help offset their requirements. Not available everywhere. I've got a little map to show in the next slide, but the main takeaway here is for every 1,000 kilowatt hours you make one credit. And in some places, the homeowner or whoever owns the system can sell that credit and get paid for it. The value is going to vary quite a bit based on the market. And some places they're really high. In Washington, D.C., that value is a couple $100s. In other places, it's much lower. It might only be $5 or $25 as you make them. And just for rough comparison, we talked about the average system size at the beginning of the presentation. 6 to 7 kilowatts for a residential system. You can think of that as maybe 7 to 8 credits a year that get generated. So 7 to 8 SRECs would get generated from like a 6 to 7 kilowatt solar array. And they usually get bought by entities that want to offset their carbon requirements. Sometimes a utility, or in some cases, even private companies will want to buy those and offset their costs. Next slide. Carbon requirements. You'll notice from this slide, most of the states that are marked are in the Northeast, or at least in the Mid-Atlantic. That's where most of these policies have happened over the last decade or so. If you're in one of these states, it's really important for you to know and for your clients to know that those SRECs could have a value. And it's important for them to know that the installer, in some states, they might actually offer you money as part of the contract. This kind of thing varies quite a bit. We highly recommend that if you're in the states like New Jersey, Maryland, DC, Virginia, Massachusetts, that you really know that the value of those credits is important to the finances of the system, and that your homeowner should be asking about them. Next slide. Let's step into a little bit of the pricing examples. I'm not going to go through each of these columns, but I just want to give you kind of a general sense of how these numbers fit together. This is example pricing. It's probably not far off from most places, but in some states, the number might be a little higher, and some it might be lower based on the labor costs and things like that. The first number there, that average solar pricing, that would be a cash cost if somebody were to install this 4 kilowatt system, let's call it, roughly $11,000. The tax credit is something you get back when you file your taxes, if you have tax liability. And you would claim that back as a credit on your income taxes, a non-refundable tax credit. And then what's left is whatever's the value of the system is getting offset by those electricity savings. Now, I didn't mention any of the state incentives. So if you're someplace that has a state incentive, you might have a rebate or something that reduces your cost up front. You might have SREC income, solar renewable energy credit income, that reduces your cost. That estimated year one electricity savings, the 10-year savings and the 25-year savings, that is just reflecting the reduction of the cost of your electricity with the utility company. So over time, you're essentially fixing the cost of some of your electricity over a long period of time. Bad example from a climate perspective, but it's kind of like filling up a giant gas tank with like $1.50 gas. And then when the price is up at $3 and $4, you're still filling your car up with the $1.50 gas because you've already invested in solar. It's already on your roof and it's already generating that electricity. So as your electricity costs from the utility go up over time, and historically they generally tend to go up 1%, 2%, 3% year over year on average, as those costs for the utility electricity go up, the electricity that's coming from your solar is fixed because you've already paid for it. That's where a lot of that value comes in, because you're avoiding paying that cost to the utility company. And over time, that economics is going to look different based on how big your system is, how much electricity you're using on your property and how much you paid for it, and then what your export credit policy is, whether you're getting full credit for those electricity that you send out to the grid or something less. These are all things that our help desk and others and installer as well can explain to you for your local market. Next slide. It's kind of a similar example, but just talking about financing. If loans are a common way that people will pay for solar, not all loans are created equal. Some of them have really good terms, maybe coming from a credit union or a green bank, or even some of the solar loans. But some of those solar loans may also be have really high rates that you then buy down, that essentially increases the cost of the system. So there are some very different ways of structuring loan products for solar that can often be really confusing for a homeowner. Really important concept for this, though, is whatever you're saving on electricity on a monthly basis, that is kind of the sweet spot for what your loan payment should be. Ideally, the loan payment is less than your electricity savings. That's not always going to be the case. It might be the case in the summer when you're making more electricity than in December or January when you're making less. So understanding what those loan payments look like and what the electricity savings is for the system is really important, especially for if you're working with clients that have some sensitivity around cash flow on a monthly basis. What we see sometimes is that the homeowners will get signed up for a loan, and that loan might be $200 a month, and it's $200 a month every month, but they're only saving, $200 in electricity in July and August, and every other month they're essentially paying more than they would have otherwise. So this is a really interesting part of the industry where we can see some consumer protection issues come into play when somebody signs up for a loan that is not a good fit for their economic finances. But as I said, in general, a good loan product should be able to cost you less than what your electricity savings is on a monthly basis. Next slide. Some options, just kind of generally speaking, loans we just talked about. There's also third-party ownership. So that's leases and power purchase agreements, or PPAs. A third-party ownership is going to be when someone else owns the system. They take all the tax credits. They take all the incentives. The homeowner really is hosting that solar system and either paying monthly for the electricity savings, a lease. So they would have a fixed payment every month to essentially use the system. And then the homeowner gets to keep all the electricity savings, or a power purchase agreement where they're going to only pay for the electricity that the solar array generates at a fixed rate that is hopefully less than what they would have paid the utility company. What's available in your area depends on local laws. Not all states allow power purchase agreements or leases, but most often a lease is usually available. Sometimes the PPA or power purchase agreement isn't. Really important to remember about third-party ownership. When somebody is considering one of these, there's some stuff they want to just take into account at the beginning of the transaction. One, what are the rules when you sell your house? If you have an agreement that somebody else owns the solar on your property, you want to know what the agreement says about what happens during home sale. That's important because oftentimes you're either going to need to transfer that agreement to the new homeowner, which can complicate the sale. So you want to be prepared for that. Buy the system out, which might be an additional cost you want to fold into the home, into the transaction, or to take the system off that house and reinstall it on your new home if it's someplace that supports solar and the company allows you to do that. So those are things that you really want to be looking at. And then the other thing to look at is in the case of a power purchase agreement. By the way, all this information on our website, in our FAQs. I know we're throwing a lot at you here. In the power purchase agreement, if your cost of electricity is 10 cents, so let's say you can buy all the solar electricity from this array at 10 cents. Sometimes there is something in that agreement called an escalator where the cost will go up every like 1% or 2% a year. Long as the cost of electricity for your utility goes up faster, you're still saving money. But that's really important for people to know because they often don't realize that the cost is going to go up slowly over time. You can also get a fixed rate. You just have to ask and make sure that you understand whether that contract you're getting is a fixed cost of electricity over the whole agreement or whether it is an escalating cost. Next slide. Coming back to loans here, there's a couple different sources. I mentioned a couple of these already. Oftentimes installers will come with loans that are part of their product. Home equity line of credit, if you can access it, is a really great way to access credit for solar because the interest on that loan is considered tax deductible because you're improving your home with solar. Refinancing, if you're in the middle of refinancing a house, you can sometimes fold the cost of solar in as well. Installer provided or assisted financing. This is what I mentioned earlier, where they're bringing a loan product or they're introducing you to one of their partners. And then last but certainly not least, credit unions and local banks. The money that is flowing from the Inflation Reduction Act, again, we have to find out what happens to that money, but most of it has already been obligated to green banks all over the country. That money should result ultimately in better or more competitive loan products that are available to local credit unions and local banks over the next couple years. Assuming no disruption, again, all caveats applied, we hope that we will see really competitive, lower cost loans for solar and for energy efficiency improvements at the local level that are available for homeowners soon. So we're fingers crossed that the loan situations get better in the US with those products going out. Next slide. Okay. I'm going to take a breath here for a second because I just threw a whole bunch of information at you. How can we help? Next slide. We have a ton of resources. We're a nonprofit that's been around for about 10 years. We've answered lots of questions all over the country. We have sort of organically created a lot of materials to help answer those questions. I've highlighted some of them here for you. There'll be links sent out as well for these, but Go Solar Guide is just kind of a general how to think about this. What do you do? Very early primer. Consumer protection resources have everything in it from how to read your proposal, what questions to ask, how to handle an installer that you're having problems with, which is sometimes a problem, how to vet contractors. We, as Jasenia mentioned at the beginning, we don't make recommendations for installers. We want to help you know how to find installers and ask questions. So we're not going to give you a preferred vendor list. We're a neutral nonprofit, but we do want to provide guidance on how people can go through and be better consumers. And the last one here, I wish we didn't have to have this service, but some solar homeowners do get stranded. Companies go out of business. They stop responding. We want to be able to help people figure that out. In some cases, they have a working system and there's no problem. They just want to know how to get help if they need it. In other cases, their installation may not be completed. We're trying to provide resources for them to kind of get through that time, and that's through our national help desk. Group buying programs. As Jasenia mentioned this at the beginning, we don't do this all over the country, but in states where we have staff, and I've listed them here, we do have buying programs that are available in different parts of those states at various times of the year. Highly recommend for folks that are thinking about going solar to think about joining one of these groups. It's a great way to get educated through the process. Have either a group of homeowners in that group select an installer to work with them, or in the case of our larger program, which we call Switch Together, have installers that get pre-selected. This is the one time that we would actually do that. So in some places like the Washington, D.C. area, in Minneapolis, in Ohio, Arizona, and some places that are coming in Florida as well, we run a larger scale program where we pre-vet a couple of contractors and then run a large campaign with a municipality to then install hundreds of systems during a campaign. So that's something that is available in some parts of the country. Not everybody's a grouper that wants to go in a group. Some people want to go on their own. We can help you there as well with the help desk as an individual. And then the last resource is our community solar education site and project listings, where we try to provide a little more visibility for consumers about where community solar is available and some of the projects they might be able to subscribe to. And that would be for people who typically can't put solar on their own property or want to have additional solar energy beyond what they can fit on their roof. Next slide. A little bit about what to look for in an installer. I want to just kind of leave this part of it here for folks, even though we provide this through our help desk as well. There are all sorts of things that folks need to consider when they're thinking about going solar. At the end of the day, though, they're picking a home improvement contractor. All the things you would do for a home improvement contractor, you should probably be doing here as well. Getting multiple quotes, checking licenses, looking at online reviews, maybe taking some references, checking whether they do work in your area or not, and then any kind of applicable certifications. In this case, the one that I mentioned, NABCEP is the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners. Quite a mouthful, but it is just a way to gauge whether someone has some acknowledged credentials in terms of installing solar. And then obviously their warranties and some of whatever's coming in the proposal itself. If you want help comparing your proposals, our help desk can help you with that as well. Next slide. Here's the help desk. If you have the ability to go to the website versus the email, that's our preference. It makes it a little easier for us to get people into our system. But if you don't remember any other info from today and you just want to reach out and look for a lifeline, helpdesk@solarunitedneighbors.org puts you in touch with our team. We have a staff of 4 full-time folks that run that help desk. They're under the Go Solar program that I run here at Solar United Neighbors. They're very kind and empathetic folks that are just trying to make sure that people have the right information and to be good consumers of solar. Next slide. How did we fit that in an hour? That was a lot of information. I think we're ready for some questions.
Great, we have quite a few. And I just want to remind everybody, if you put your question into the chat, please enter your question into the Q&A box because I will not be able to find your question in the chat. So let's go to the start here. How do you get community solar in California? You probably know this better, Corey or Yesenia, but I did do kind of a quick look and it's a little opaque.
Yeah, this is one of the things about community solar in general that is a little challenging because some of the programs are there, but they're not actually like fully implemented yet. California is, I think, in that category because the rules are not particularly favorable for the program to actually be successful. So there is a like approved program, but I don't think there's actually any activity that's happened yet because of the way that they've written the rules for crediting. Same is true in New Mexico. It's actually a better result in New Mexico. Like New Mexico has a program, but the program hasn't finished launching yet. So long story short, if you see someplace where you think there's solar and you can't quite figure it out, send us a message. We'll try to help sort it out for you, but it is admittedly not always clear in every state, unfortunately.
Okay. There's a lot of community solar for-profits being created in our area. Do you have advice for vetting these companies and which to choose?
This is an area that's one of the reasons why we created our listing site, which does not have perfect information for all markets, but depending on the state, they sometimes will have a listing of providers that have been authorized to work in the program. New Jersey, for example, I know has a list like that. Maryland does as well. So if you want to contact our help desk and just ask that question and list your state, we can probably help you find that resource. Some states, unfortunately, do not. Illinois, actually, I think also has a really good listing program, and Oregon might too. So some states have better public information on this than others.
I'm also putting into the chat link to a report from National Consumer Law Center about like kind of what to be looking for and thinking about.
Yeah, I was going to
Yeah,
say,
thank you.
look at the contract at a time, ask them if there are any escalation clauses, what's the difference between what you would pay the community solar provider versus what you're paying your utility company. Are you saving money? Because sometimes these community solars are offered as a premium because you want to have that green energy, so they may charge you a little bit more than you would be charged by the utility company. So it's important that you read the contract because everything's in the details.
Thank you, Jasenia. And you just highlight what Ellie posted there. That is a great guide from NCLC. Highly recommend you take a look at that if you haven't already.
Hey, how many hours of energy/electricity does a battery provide?
Most batteries, like kind of that are on the market now, anywhere from 3 to 13 kilowatt hours. That doesn't mean 3 to 13 hours. That depends on how much you're running or how much you're like using it for. But just to give you an example, most houses in the US on average use about 25 to 30 kilowatt hours a day. So if you were going to run your whole house on batteries in the event of an outage, you might need 2 to 3 large batteries to be able to cover that, just to give you a sense. And each one of those is going to be about $12,000 to $15,000. So battery storage definitely adds up if you're trying to cover the whole house versus just part of it.
Okay. Does your roof need to be in good condition before solar panels are installed?
Whoever asked that question, thank you for asking it, because I did not cover that, and I should have in the webinar. We usually recommend that folks have at least 10 years of life on their roof if they're thinking about installing solar, because the roof needs to be in good shape in order to be able to support the solar. But also, if you need to replace the roof, you're going to incur the cost of having the solar installer come and remove those panels, store them temporarily, and put them back on the roof after you do your roof work. And that cost can be anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000 roughly. So the longer lifespan you have on your roof, the more you push that cost into the future. So 10 years is a good rule of thumb.
I was going to mention this is also one of the biggest barriers to solar adoption in income qualified households is the state of their roof. I know that it kept some of our DC clients from being able to go solar through the district program because their roofs were just not in good enough shape. So it's one of the reasons when we're advocating and providing technical assistance to states or other folks designing income qualified programs that they include the cost of roof repairs or roof replacements, because like Corey said, it's very important that the roof is in structural enough shape to take on the panels, but also you want it to be a serviceable roof so you don't have to pay the cost of taking the panels down and reinstalling the panels.
Wasn't there in the IRA specific legislation around the things that went to the EPA that said that roof repair and rewiring would be part of what could be paid for here?
Yes, correct. That is part of the IRA and the solar for all funding. The person that drafted most of the solar for all had worked on the DC solar for all program, so she was pretty familiar with some of those barriers to solar adoption. So that's why it's included as part of the costs that are allowed.
Okay, and I do think that Corey, in your presentation, you did address this, but the person asked the question, I think, before you addressed it. So I'll ask the question anyway, just so that everybody can specifically hear the answer. But what happens after 20 or 30 years? Do they need to be replaced or upgraded? Will there be any out of pockets?
If you have a system that is owned by someone else, a lease or a PPA, at the end of that agreement, you'll have the opportunity to renew it if you want to keep that system on your roof. But I think the question is primarily, if the system is no longer usable, what happens to it? What we typically will tell somebody is if your system is paid for and it's still operational, you should probably try to keep it operating as long as you can, because it's making free electricity for you at that point. So after 20 to 25 years, that asset's already been, paid for. If you do need to remove it, or it's no longer operational and repairing it is more than, you would want to spend, it can be removed and recycled. The recycling options are slowly improving in the US. It's still not really easy to recycle equipment, just because the cost of recycling is more than the cost of the components are not worth the cost of recycling. So you'll see oftentimes if somebody removes a system, they end up just sending it to a landfill, even though we want it to be recycled, because it costs them less. So the whole the whole rule set around recycling is still sort of getting better in the US. But what we usually will tell people is keep it operating as long as possible, because you don't have to worry about recycling and it's generating you electricity. And when you do get to that point, 10, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, the ecosystem for recovering those parts should be better as well.
So add, the panels don't stop working just because they've been there for 20, 25 years. They'll just be a little less productive and there's no warranty on them, but they still work. There are some programs. Alaska is doing a lot of research on taking the panels that have been used commercially that are replaced every few years, but are still very much in good working condition, and use them to install in income qualified households and folks that couldn't normally cover the cost of installing panels. So even though there's not a lot of recycling options available right now, there are some other options for reusing these panels.
And just on that topic, just to make sure for folks for the Solar for All program, though, that is new equipment that's getting installed. We just generally speaking, we want people to have a choice, but folks that are in income qualified programs should be getting new equipment as well and not getting, something that's used unless that's their choice to be able to save the money. So those options for recycling are happening and they should be more available for upcycling equipment. But just want to be clear about the Solar for All program is deploying new equipment for homeowners, not recycled equipment.
Regarding the periodic inspection that you mentioned, is that covered by the homeowner or is it the installer's responsibility and expense?
Unless it's written into your contract, which is pretty unusual, the homeowner would cover that expense. It's about probably $400 to $500 to have somebody come and inspect. In some places it might be, up to 800, depending on the market.
And that's another thing when we're advising folks on the signing programs for income qualified families, that we try to reduce the burden on these families. We want them to go solar, but we don't want to create a burden on them. So we try to include OPM, operation and maintenance, and have them include some of these visits so it's not at a cost to these homeowners.
Okay, I'm gonna forge ahead into one question in particular that I'd like Bruce to answer because he just sent an email out to our listserv about it. But is it possible for housing counseling agencies to become Solar for All grant recipients? If so, could you provide guidance on how and when to apply?
Well, that's interesting. I think that's been, the large grants have been distributed. Now, the question is whether you could do sub-grants. And Corey, Corey or Yesenia, do you have an answer to that?
Just any, you want to take this one?
It depends on the state and the grantees. Most of them are entering the planning phase. So there may be opportunities. You just got to keep an eye out on your state or in who the grantee is, because they'll probably be issuing requests for proposals or information pretty soon. So that's an opportunity. Will probably be around doing outreach and education.
But I guess, Bruce, what I was doing was teeing it up for you to talk about the recent David Berenbaum letter to the
Okay.
Departments of Energy.
Missed that one. The opportunity we think that is already in place is that so I think we talked about this at the very beginning, but just to review it, we had asked the Office of Housing Counseling to write the state offices and suggest that housing counselors would make excellent home energy advisors, and that they would be and they could really pick up a part of the role of doing community outreach. And part, I think, one of the things that would be very interesting is that if you have a good database of the people that you've counseled who have gone on to buy a house, that you know what their income and demographics are, you know what their location is, they may be people who would be interested in this, and that would be the first marketing piece, and then you can market more broadly. Um, the states all have money that require them to do some community outreach, and we think this is a good way to handle that. The whole idea is that you can be the kind of the go-between and introductory source of information for people. It's not going to be as in-depth as people with Solar United Neighbors or another thing, but what you can do as your role is to figure out and help people understand what the array of programs are, how they might fit in. There'll be some tools that we're going to explore in future webinars that can help people assess their own house. There's energy audits, maybe a good way to go. There's assessments, as in Corey's been talking about whether solar is the right fit for you. I mean, all those things are pieces of that, plus the many state and utility and in some cases local programs as well. So the idea is to make an inventory of each of these and in your state and what's available to your people, and help them figure out what the next steps are and what might make the most sense. We'll do kind of a deeper dive into vetting contractors and what should be in a contract and things like that with some of our other resource people, though Solar United sounds like they've done some very good work in this. And we think that the states will have money that could pay for this service so that you could be funded to do this very specific targeting work. The nice thing, the opportunity right now that Ellie just mentioned is that the letter just went out this week to the state energy departments. And we sent a copy of it to everybody on the Leaders in Housing Counseling listserv. And in there also is Christie's guide to how to talk to these energy offices and some talking points, things to be sure to bring up so that you're kind of talking their language and helping them understand what the opportunity is that you can provide. And there's a link to identifying what the energy office is in your locality. So we think this is an opportunity that's really worth exploring in your state. We did a test one in Pennsylvania. There was a lot of interest. They had not signed their contract yet. Those contracts, as I understand it, have all been signed and funded. So be worthwhile for somebody to go back to figure that out, to kind of solidify that relationship. But we found them, the Pennsylvania people, to be very kind of interested and friendly, and hopefully you can have the same experience wherever you go. But it's an opportunity, and it's a way of broadening out your business line, but also really serving your community. And given the deep work you're doing in underserved communities and in some of the places that are really targeted by the IRA, this is an opportunity to be worth exploring.
Thanks. Okay, so here is another question that I believe was addressed in the presentation that was asked before you addressed it, but I'll just ask it again so you can get the information out. What course of action would a homeowner take if the solar company goes out of business or it's sold and it does not service your area?
Thank you. So if the company is going out of business, you still have access to all of the warranties on the equipment, but it is probably a good idea to make sure you have another installer to call if you should need any maintenance. And there's a couple of different services that do that now nationally. The easiest thing to do is probably just contact that help desk and we can give you some of those links, but they are what they call like third-party warranty assurance products that you sometimes can take advantage of. Worst case, if you have a system that's been abandoned and so installer's not available anymore, you would need to find another installer to come and do an inspection just to make sure that they understand what's wrong, and then they would essentially give you a quote to repair it if it needed to repair, just like you would if you called an HVAC contractor to come and fix your system, even though they didn't install it. If the company is purchased or is sold to another company, most of the time, not always, the warranties and the coverage and stuff will transfer in some way to the new company. So it's important to just listen to what's communicated to you through that transaction. Not always the case, but there should be some communication telling you like what's covered still and what isn't.
Okay, so somebody asked this question about a specific state, but in general, if somebody is trying to find a green bank in their state, is there a way to do that?
There is, and I am not remembering the link right now, but there is there's a website that actually lists where all the green banks are. They do a lot of coordination, but I am drawing a blank on the actual website. So we can certainly look that up and share it later if that's helpful.
Yeah, sure. Send it along to Ebony, and she can make sure that it gets into the email, the recording email that goes out to the listserv.
Okay. Yeah,
We'll have all the links in there that were mentioned during the webinar, and we could just add another one. Thank you. So a couple of people asked this in a couple of different ways, interestingly enough, because we talked about it at while we were kind of in our technical testing phase before the webinar, but what might happen to the incentives and to the funding and all that under the current administration?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at this and just feel free to fill any gaps in. Different parts of the Inflation Reduction Act and all of the federal sort of programs are at different levels of risk. The tax credit, for example, probably not at great risk, although when they go into appropriations and do the budgeting process and all of that reconciliation, there might be some changes to it. But generally speaking, there's pretty good support for the solar tax credit on both sides of the aisle in a bunch of different states. Programs that are more directly connected to low and moderate income communities, disadvantaged communities, like some of the bonus credits that are out there, those are probably at risk. The Solar for All program that we've been talking about here is one that will probably be at risk, but a lot of the money has already been obligated to the cities, to the states and organizations that are implementing it. So it hopefully will be harder for that money to be recovered. That's one of those areas we're really trying to follow pretty closely, because some of those programs, like one we're working on, for example, in one state, all the agreements have been signed, the money's already been like obligated and is available. That's different than if a state is not as far along in the planning process for their Solar for All program and might be more at risk to having the process interfered with because they haven't signed agreements yet. So it's going to depend quite a bit. And then all of the state level money that is supporting rebates for heat pumps and electric panel upgrades and things like that, that money has also mostly been distributed. So we're hopeful that it's going to be hard for them to claw it back. But lots we don't know still. Just anything to add there?
Yeah, I saw a question about executive order interfering with the taxes. The short answer is she shouldn't. Taxes are controlled by law, and the only way to change that should be an act of Congress. But that doesn't mean the executive can't throw a wrench into how it's applied. But it shouldn't eliminate the taxes. Like Corey said, there's a lot of support in Congress for these taxes, so we'll have to wait and see what happens during reconciliation in the budget process.
Okay, so if somebody already has solar panels, but it's not quite enough, would you recommend also joining community solar?
I would if it's available. Yes. I mean, my solar array on my roof covered about 50% of my electricity, and I signed up for community solar to cover the rest. So if you can't cover all of it locally on your property and you want to, and you are in a state that has community solar, that is definitely one of the things that people use it for.
Okay, I'm not exactly sure what this question is asking. I'm just going to say it, and maybe you'll understand it better than I'm understanding it. But if someone has at least 26 acres of land, will your company place solar panels on the land for people to purchase?
Okay. It sounds like that might be kind of around hosting an array, maybe for community solar. We, as a nonprofit, we don't do that development work. If you are in a state that has an active community solar program, it's possible that someone might want to use that land to host an array. And it is 26 acres, if it's usable, is big enough for a small scale community solar array. But it depends on other factors like where it is in relation to the utility lines and things like that. I would say that if you are interested in hosting an array and you are in a community solar state, feel free to contact the help desk. You're welcome to ask for me directly. We can give you a little bit of guidance there, but it depends a lot on where it is and the location of the programs.
Yeah, I think there are some companies out there that help connect landowners with developers that are interested in building solar arrays. So, but again, just connect with the help desk. They can answer.
Okay. Where would one check for the SREC value in their state?
Okay, I saw this one in there as well. There are a couple. The easiest way to check for it, since there are markets where the prices fluctuate, there are a couple of brokerage companies that publicly produce that information just as part of their marketing, but it's pretty accurate. The two that are probably have the most coverage are SREC Trade and Sol Systems. Excuse me. So if you go onto either one of their websites, you should see a listing of the current price for SRECs in the states that they support. And I think the person maybe was asking about Maryland, and they're definitely listed there. Just for general reference, the Maryland credits I think are between like $50 and $75 a credit, but I haven't looked recently. Thanks, Jasenia, for posting those.
We serve as the local consumer protection agency handling solar complaints at times. Can we reach out to your help desk for technical support on specific complaints to assist our consumers?
Yes, 100%. We do that all the time.
That was a quick answer. How reliable are solar panel output in comparison to high electrical usage of a home?
Trying to think about the way that question is phrased. This solar output is going to be reliable in terms of what it does on a yearly and annual basis because it's pretty predictable. So it's not necessarily going to cover all of the electricity usage in your house, but it doesn't need to. If an average home uses, let's say, 10,000 kilowatt hours a year, just for a round number, my solar array might only cover 6,000 or 7,000 kilowatt hours, but I don't need it to power my house. I'm using it to cover electricity when I'm producing energy, and I'm getting credited for the rest because of those solar export policies. The solar itself will produce pretty consistently over its lifespan because of the way that the technology works in terms of how much sun's available in the spring and the summer and the fall. Like if you look at my array, I've had it for 10 years. It almost always produces roughly the same amount of electricity per year, kind of slowly declining over time based on the equipment degradation. So it's very consistently generates energy, but you don't need to match it to when you use energy because of the way that it works.
And just to add to that, when the installers are working with you, they'll design a system based on your budget, but also what you need and how much you want to cover. That doesn't mean that eventually you will end up using more energy. I'm a solar homeowner as well. And when our panels got installed, neither one worked from home and we didn't have an EV. So it more than covered our energy uses at the time. Afterwards, we've added an EV charger, and we're now both working from home. So our energy use has gone up a little bit and it doesn't cover it as much, but the panels are still producing the same they did when we first installed.
Okay, a couple different questions about what happens when you try to sell your home and their solar panels. So I'm going to just kind of put them both together into one question. What happens when you want to sell, but you still owe money on the loan for the solar panel installation? And do solar panels on the home affect the resale value? I heard realtors say that home buyers do not like old solar panels on the roof. Is this true?
Okay. Yeah, a couple different questions there. So one, if you own the system outright, there's no loan and it's not a third party like a lease or a PPA, it's a home improvement. So you're conveying that with the sale. You're selling a house that has a lower cost of operating it from an electricity cost perspective. So that should result in additional value. It's going to vary by market. Some markets that's more valued than others. If you still have a loan, you would most likely arrange to pay it off and incorporate that value into the sale. So you're paying off the loan and including the cost of the payoff into the home sale. If it's a third-party agreement, then you definitely need to call the company, read your contract, and understand the process to facilitate the transaction when if that equipment is owned by somebody else, because they're going to need to third-party agreements like leases and PPAs will often have like a UCC1 fixture filing on the property. So you need to coordinate getting that removed so that the sale can be completed and then put back on again. So it kind of complicates the sale. And as far as the question about like old solar panels not necessarily being something people want, it's definitely possible. The older the system, obviously there are things that might need to be addressed. We would recommend getting the system inspected before you sell so that you can show the system is in good operating order and that it's functioning and has good electricity value. And if you're buying a house, definitely recommend having the system inspected either by you or by the seller so that you can understand the condition of the system when you buy it.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions that I think either Bruce or Christy could answer, and I'm going to kind of put them together. Somebody wants to know if funding will continue for the energy programs and how sustainable is an energy advisor job with the new administration. And then, and along with that, another question is there a PowerPoint presentation for training clients in our counseling session? And are there steps for virtual counselors to get trained to help clients?
Okay, let me take a shot at that. So we don't know 100% on the home energy advisor about the money. Essentially, I'm going to mimic a little bit of what Corey had said. our understanding is that contracts have been signed and money has been transferred to the states. So it's that's a commitment, and it's hard to get it back. There may be some ways that the administration could make it more difficult to spend money, but if the money's already been committed and they're signed contracts, then you know, the likelihood of it being in place is better. Um, so and you know, it is we hope that it'll be viable, and I think that the contracts that we've seen have really been 1 and 2 year contracts, so that gives you a window of opportunity. I think we can expect that there won't be continuous funding after that. And what was the other question? I think I missed one there.
How training for housing counselors to become energy advisors?
Oh, okay. So yeah, and I think that's what Christie's been working on, and been working with the Soul United people and with others as well. And we're hoping to raise some money to do that, and we hope that we'll be able to get this moving this spring still. So it would be done virtually, not in person, and it would be resources as well as kind of Zoom webinar things.
And Christy has a list of folks who have expressed interest in taking our training once we have it all developed. So, Christy, if you could pop that back into the chat again, anybody on this call who hasn't already expressed their interest can go to this link and put your information in, and you will be part of the group that hears about our curriculum when it becomes available.
Yeah, so I'll insert the list, and you're welcome to sign up. We will send out updates once we know more. As Bruce mentioned, some of the funding has been allocated to states, but I believe when we talk to like states like Pennsylvania, they have some type of legislation where the state lawmakers have to have a prior authorization before the funding is dispersed. So there's also some state government hurdles. And if you can reach out to your state energy offices, that would help us in tracking what type of steps that we need to take next.
Great. So there's a couple of people in the chat who have said that they're interested. So once Christy puts that link in there, go ahead and go to that link and fill in your information for her. Okay. Let's see. So somebody's asking about senior homeowners who have fallen victim to the solar scams due to misleading promises or predatory practices. And do you have suggestions for how to verify the legitimacy of a solar provider before signing the contracts? And then what advice or resources can you share to protect against the scams?
Yeah, this one definitely is questions and support we get through our help desk. The first one, which I think is just true in general for contractors, that it provides a little bit of protection there is one, if someone comes to your door and is interacting with you, don't sign their contract. We should always be getting multiple quotes. That is a pretty common tactic of non-reputable sales staff where they're coming in pressuring somebody at their doorfront. That alone, I think, would solve quite a bit. If you're uncertain of the validity of a particular company, I think all the things you would normally do to check for a home improvement contractor are valid here too, looking at reviews online. You can definitely reach out to us to try to look for information. If we have it, we'll certainly share what we know. We don't have full visibility across the country. And then in terms of resources, the on that consumer protection link that I think is in the chat there and is going to be circulated later, there are resources on like how to read proposals, questions to ask of contractors, and then dealing with any problem installers that you're working with. Those are all things that I would recommend looking at. But by far the at the top of the list there is don't sign something at the door and get 3 quotes and take your time.
Okay. Do you have a sense of the percentage of customers that are being stranded because a company is not being responsive or has gone out of business?
We don't have numbers on that. I wish we did. There's just not any like consolidated information nationwide. Generally speaking, knowing the volume of rooftop solar that's happening, I don't think it's a a really large part of the market. It's larger than I think we would all like it to be, and they are very visible stories. But percentage wise, I would not expect it to be like a significant percentage of solar installations, because otherwise the market just wouldn't function. I know that's not a great answer, and we're actually hoping to do a data collection project with our own help desk over this in 2025 to kind of give us a better handle on that, so since we can start tracking those numbers better, at least for our own work. But I don't have a particular number to share.
Let me just ask one other question: is how do these hold up under storms and all the climate events we're having in Florida, well, everywhere?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I mean, the systems are built to local building codes. They're built to be in harsh conditions for a long period of time. With that in mind, so building codes like Miami, for example, that have a very strong codes around wind, those systems are engineered to support that. What we do see, at least in terms of hurricane damage and things of that nature, is that roofs that have rooftop solar actually do better in many cases, because the supporting structure of the panels and that racking is actually a support for the roof. So you will see things like the panels are essentially keeping the roof in place. The other side of the roof might get the shingles get torn off, or the neighbor's roof is gone, but these are still here. Obviously, mileage varies, but generally speaking, they fare pretty well in strong weather. They're also built to support hail strikes and things like that. So if you're in a place that has extreme weather around hail, obviously the general rule of thumb is like, if there's something that's going to damage your roof, like a tree falling on it, your panels are probably not going to survive that either. But hail, strong winds, lots of snow, that's what they're built to be able to withstand most of that.
And do you have to dust them off? Do they get dirty?
If you live someplace where there is a lot of dust and grime, dry conditions, or maybe by highways or someplace where there's a lot of particulate matter, you can get additional energy production by getting your panels cleaned every couple years. If you live someplace where there's a lot of rain and the panels are on a pitched roof, which is most common, generally speaking, you don't need to wash them. The rain will kind of clean them off periodically. But yeah, if you're in a drier climate, it can help.
I just want to comment to people. There's a couple of people who said they had trouble with the link that Christy posted. I posted a different one that is in the chat. That is the one that will get you to the actual questions for the energy advisors. So please go to the one that I posted. Okay. Somebody wanted to know, what is the average weight bearing of panels covering a minimal 200 square footage of a sloped roof and a flat roof?
Oh, testing my solar training here. I'm like trying to remember what that number is. I think it is between probably about 7 to 10 pounds per square foot, if I remember right. I would have to go back and check that.
Okay. And then somebody wanted to know, where would you refer clients who have had solar installed that isn't functioning and they're unable to reach their providers yet are stuck paying for them along with their energy bills?
Yeah, this is something we're starting to see change in different markets, especially markets that have a lot of solar adoption already, is that companies are starting to do maintenance and take on clients from abandoned customers, but it varies a lot. Quite frankly, this is an area we are constantly looking for companies that are willing to do that in different parts of the country, because we want to be able to share that with people who contact us. And it's not a great answer, but I would say if you're in an area where you're not sure how to handle that, and it's not easy to find them through, typical contractor searches, Yelp and calling and providers, definitely contact us, because we sometimes will have that information about local companies. And then there are a couple of national companies that do the abandoned homeowners coverage. Green Lancer, Solar Insure, there's another one I'm not remembering, that oftentimes will have a network of maintenance providers as well, but their coverage also varies quite a bit based on market, because they just need to have providers in those areas, and oftentimes for smaller markets, there's just nobody to do that servicing. So I hate to say that it depends thing, but the markets vary quite a bit across the country, so we try to keep track of it. It's hard to do.
Okay, and then the last thing that I am going to, it's not a question, it is just a little bit of a piece of info from one of our attendees who's had solar panels for 10 years. 2 of the panels incurred damage from straight winds, knocking down a 75-foot tree and the solar panels last year. Fortunately, our homeowners insurance paid for the replacement of the solar panels. The challenge was finding solar panels similar to the ones that we have. They moved the new ones to the end of the house that is not visible from the street and used the older ones in the damaged area. Just sharing my experience.
Thanks for sharing that experience. And I will add something there to that, which is that when you're thinking about repairing equipment as well, if you lost 1 panel or 2 panels, oftentimes the cost of repairing it or replacing it is more than the cost of the savings from the electricity generation production. So you can also just talk to the installer about abandoning a panel in place. You might find that it's actually economically more advantageous to just leave it and not repair it. But that comes down to the cost and the math for that particular system.
Okay, so that's the end of our questions. I will say people are saying they're still having trouble with the link for the energy advisors. They're saying they're being asked to sign into Google. So I'm not sure how to resolve all of that within the next 2 minutes. So if you do have more questions about it, you should reach out to Christy. And Christy, if you can just put your email address into the chat, you can reach out to Christy and Christy will get you the right link.
We'll also correct the link and send it out with the webinar recording.
Okay, so with that, I am going to hand it over to Bruce to wrap us up.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate Solar United neighbors have been really terrific and very helpful in a lot of our work, and we will continue to lean on them. It sounds like the help desk will be a great resource as well.